everybody, Zach here for Mythos Pedals, and today we're going to talk about pedal maintenance. So I've busted out some of the tools. We're going to talk about how to maintain and keep your pedals working as they should. Now, this is not a repair guide. We're not going to talk about how to fix stuff if it's absolutely broken. Just a way of giving you guys tips and tricks that I use for maintaining pedals so they work as they're supposed to. So let's get into it. The first thing I like to do when looking at pedal maintenance is checking to see if potentiometers are scratchy. Do the jacks or foot switch seem scratchy or intermittent? These are the things that we can fix really quickly, hopefully, and easily. Also like to check and see if anything is loose. Are the pots loose? Any of the nuts? Any of the parts inside seem loose? Is there extra noise or things rattling? And then also, are things shorting out? Is the pedal ceasing to function when you're using it, or just using the functions on the pedal? These are the things we're going to go over. So let's start by trying to figure out how to remedy things that sound scratchy or are intermittent. So, scratchy or intermittent components. What you need is some electronic contact cleaner. I got this bottle from Radio Shack ages ago. The industry standard is Deoxit D5. We'll put a link in the description. But this is the type of product you need to use to clean electronic components. Don't use WD-40. It is not designed for fixing these sort of problems. But electronic contact cleaner can fix a lot of issues if you're having trouble with your pots being scratchy, the jacks seem to be shorting out, or if the foot switch is not seeming to latch or making a lot of extra noise. So, cleaning a foot switch is really simple. On a triple pole double throw foot switch, like in a Mjolnir, something that is in most standard boutique pedals, there is a gap between the top of the foot switch actuator and above the threading. So you take the contact cleaner and you put it on that gap and then spray it. The contact cleaner will go down into the switch and then you push the switch a few times. So let's spray the switch and I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. So again, you want to put the tip of the contact cleaner right here in between that gap where the foot switch kind of moves. So you put it here and then spray and then push it a few times. Now, depending on how much of a problem you're having with the switch, you might have to do that a couple times, do it in a few different spots around the foot switch, but that should get the contact cleaner down into the body of the switch and help remedy any problems. Cleaning potentiometers. Now, this is a 16 millimeter pot. The connections on these can be different depending on how the pot is wired inside the pedal, but this is a pretty standard sort of potentiometer inside Guitar Effects. And the place you clean it is right here behind all the terminal connections. All you have to do is take your spray, put the straw of the spray in there, spray it, and then turn the pot a few times. That'll get out any dust and dirt and should remove any scratching. Now, I should say some circuits just have scratchy pots. Sometimes, depending on what the potentiometer is doing in the circuit, it may cause static or have some sort of scratchy sound, like a super hard-on, for example. But if a pedal wasn't making any sort of noise and you notice these sort of problems, this is how you fix it. So let me show you that. So again, you want to take your spray and put it in this opening above this little wafer on the potentiometer. So you take your contact cleaner and spray it in there, and then if it's on a pedal, of course, you will take the potentiometer and just turn it a few times and spray it. I like to spray it on both sides of the pot and just try to get that thing cleaned out in case there's any dirt or anything inside the potentiometer itself. This should remedy that problem. One thing that Matthew just pointed out is some pedals, you can't really get to the potentiometers. You have to take the PCB out to access that opening on the back of the pot. So it's still totally doable, but you have to remove the PCB, which means removing the knobs, removing the nuts, the washers, and gently pulling the components of the inside of the pedal out. Now, in certain pedals, like a vintage DS1 or an Ibanez pedal, the potentiometers are a little bit easier to access, so you can get in here and clean them with a little less trouble. And sometimes these are the pedals you're going to have most trouble with because they're a little more open, and since they're older, there's more potential for there to be dirt and stuff inside the pods. But keep that in mind when you're going to clean your pedal. Cleaning your jacks. So there's a couple different jacks you have to be aware of when you're doing maintenance on your guitar effects. So on the pedals that we're making now, we use an open panel jack, something like a Switchcraft or Neutrik or Reen jack, like what you'd find inside a guitar. And it's just an open frame. There's no box or anything inside there. So it's pretty easy to clean. And sometimes these really don't give you a lot of trouble. They can get corroded, but that could be very dependent on your climate, things like that. You also need to be aware of cleaning the DC jacks. But in my experience, the jacks that give the most issue are jacks that are found on something like this Boss pedal, which are a box style jack. So these are all enclosed, and when they get dirty, they kind of just stay in there. There's nowhere for the dirt to go. But I will show you how to clean these really easily and hopefully fix any issues that you're having with your pedal jacks. So cleaning the instrument jacks, the in and out jacks, is a really easy job. All you have to do is take the contact cleaner again, and then you will just spray it inside the jack like this, and take a cable and just work it in and out, and that should remove any dirt or corrosion. This is just an old cable end that I cut off and we've used for a lot of projects. Any patch cable will work, and then the same thing goes for the power jack. You want to give it a little spray and then use a DC jack and just plug it in and out, and that should help remove any corrosion that is inside the pedal. So the next thing is how to tighten up anything that gets loose on your pedal. This happens. Things get loose from wear and tear, from general use, and sometimes you need to have the tools to keep things nice and tight so it doesn't cause a problem down the road. So here's some of the stuff that I like to use. I have this toolkit from Rene Martinez and Mojo Tone. It has most screwdrivers, a couple socket drivers. I have some of our tools here for building pedals, and then also a spanner. A spanner wrench, like this one from ESP, is really handy and can do most of the things we're going to talk about. But the main tools you need to be aware of, and the stuff you need to tighten up stuff that gets loose, is usually things to tighten up a pot, tighten up a jack, and a foot switch. And the sizes for those are 10 millimeter for your potentiometer. Your output jacks typically are going to be 1/2 inch socket drivers. It could be a little bit smaller if it is a board mounted jack. And then a foot switch is 9/16. So I have a combination wrench here that we use for doing a lot of pedal work. But also you can just have a spanner wrench and do most things with it. So let's get into tightening up some of the parts on these pedals. Tightening things on standard style pedals. Foot switch, like I said, is a 9/16. One thing you want to do when you're working on a foot switch, and just to make sure that you don't twist anything internally, is take the back off, and then you can use your hand to hold the foot switch when you tighten it, and use some sort of combination wrench or socket driver to get that nice and tight. Same thing goes for the in and out jacks. Again, using a 1/2 inch socket driver, you can hold the jack in place and tighten that up to make sure that it's not going anywhere. Some pedals ground, like we do it, through the enclosure itself, so you need to make sure that these in and out jacks are really tight so that the lock washer is connecting the jack through the enclosure itself and making sure that there's continuity for the ground of the circuit. Pull this knob off here, because tightening up the potentiometer is really simple. Again, it's a 10 mil socket driver. You just put that on there and keep that cinched down. And again, just like on the foot switch, if this potentiometer is not attached to the circuit board like it is on ours, you need to make sure that it's not spinning freely inside the pedal. That can cause problems. We'll talk about that later. But for this sort of modern style pedal construction, these are the tools you need. On a vintage style pedal like this TS9, if we pull this knob off here, if we can get it off.
Come on.
There we go.
Nice.
It's the same thing. You want to keep that nice and tight. But just like on that vintage DS1, these pots are wired with wires not mounted to the board, so they will spin. All these other things kind of hold true, and a socket driver is not necessary. You can just use a spanner and get in there and tighten these things up with a spanner wrench, and it'll make really quick work of any maintenance that you need to do. So springboarding off the loose component conversation, if some of your components get loose, it can cause a lot of problems. One of the things on vintage style pedals like this TS9, the potentiometers, if they get loose, they can actually short out against the enclosure of the pedal. So we'll get in real tight and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So on this drive pot, as you can see, when it's loose, it's spinning freely, and when it touches the side of the enclosure itself, it shorts out. Now that is going to send that terminal in there to ground, and it'll cause this pedal not to work. I've bought and repaired a lot of TS9s that weren't working, only to find out that's the only problem. So that's something you need to be aware of. In addition to that, with your jacks, if they spin, they can break the wire. So we're going to show you how to fix any broken wire using a soldering iron, and that should be the majority of the things you need to know for maintaining your pedals. That work? Yeah. Imagine that little ground wire has come loose from a terminal. How do you fix it? All you really have to do is tin your soldering iron, don't breathe that, and then go in and flow that wire back onto the terminal. And that connection is going to be right. Now you might need a wire stripper if that broke, and just strip about 3 mil, 1/8 of an inch off the end of that wire, give it a little twist, or tin it with your soldering iron, and it'll go right back to the way it's supposed to be. Another thing that we didn't talk about, on pedals that have the board mounted DC jack, if it's something like this, sometimes these connections can break, and all you have to do is, unless the traces are broken, all you have to do is reflow that solder, and that should make a new connection, and your power jack should come back to life. One way to test that is if it functions on a battery and not on the DC jack, then chances are that connection's broken. It's a pretty easy fix, and it just takes a second to get your pedal back to life. Okay, lastly, one thing I like to do is check current draw for my pedals. If I'm building a pedal board and I'm not entirely sure of what a pedal is pulling from my power supply, and I need to know so I don't overwhelm it, you can check it with something like this. This is a one-spot or true tone milliamp meter. It's also a cable tester. It's a really handy tool to have in your toolbox for checking these things. So let's get it plugged up. So plugging this up is really easy. Plug in a little DC cable to the output. The input is on this side. It will show that it's not pulling any power. Now on a modern pedal like the Mjolnir here, plug that in. You're getting about 16 milliamps. We turn the pedal on, staying around there. On a vintage style pedal like this TS9, plug it up. It's going to be pulling a little bit, but you need some sort of cable end on the pedal to actually turn it on. So doing that, it's still only pulling about 5 milliamps. Overdrives don't pull a lot of power, but this is a handy thing to have when you need to test stuff when you're building a board or just doing general maintenance. All right, so that's really it. These are the tips and tricks that I use for maintaining pedals that I have. Now, hopefully, if you have a Mythos pedal, you're not going to run into any problems, and if you do, feel free to email us. We'll walk you through taking care of it, or you can send it to us for repair. But taking care of stuff that lives on the pedal shelf, hopefully this will serve as a handy guide for taking care of any problems you might run into. In the description below, you can get links to all these sort of tools, so you can have them at your workbench. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Visit mythospedals.com to learn more about the pedals that we make, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.